Resisting the temptation to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Cohen, I would...
Thank you, Mr. King.
I'd put out, I have in my hand an article of Investor Business Daily titled, and it's dated, by the way, the 6th of May, but it's titled, Obama Praised Baltimore Police He's Now Investigating. And it points out the study that the gentleman from Tennessee referenced, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which I have in my hand. And it also quotes from the police chief of Baltimore, who said he changed outdated procedures that put officers at odds with the community. This goes back to March of 2015 was the date of the report. Date of this article is the first week or so in May. It's interesting to me that I listened to the testimony of Ms. Rahr, and I give you credit for contributing to that report as well, that you'd like to see a shift from the warrior mentality to that of a guardian. And I think of the night I came here and I watched live on television the encounters with Baltimore police and rock-throwing mobs. And I saw the Baltimore police retreat from rock-throwing mobs. And so I'd ask you, is there a time they need to convert back to the warrior mentality, and was that the time?
I want to clarify, when I talk about a guardian mentality, that absolutely does not imply retreat. It does not imply weakness. It implies being able to do two things at once.
Okay, but you could do that by just answering my question also.
I'm sorry?
You could also clarify by just answering my question, was Baltimore a time that they should have been more of a warrior mentality when they were facing rock-throwing mobs and retreating in the face of rock-throwing mobs? Was that a time that there needed to be an engagement of the police rather than a retreat?
They needed to use warrior tactics while having the mindset of a guardian.
Okay, thank you. And I would turn to Ms. Ramirez, and your testimony was very interesting to me. And I began thinking about our Constitution and where it says in the First Amendment, and I'll paraphrase but also accurately, Congress shall make no law respecting the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, sir.
And there's no prohibition in that statement that I read, and would you agree that prohibits Congress from making a law or enforcing a law that would prohibit the people from violently assembling to petition the government for redress of grievances?
Congress does have the right to restrain violence in any form.
Yes, and so we agree that freedom of speech isn't the right to yell fire in a crowded theater.
Correct.
And then we could also agree, well, no, I'll ask you, is it lawful or unlawful for one to pay protesters and encourage them to become violent?
I think that's a crime.
Yes, and I would agree with that also. And I would point out that and encourage violence, I want to pull that part out as a separate clause in my statement here for this purpose. I have in my hand a stack of tweets and stories and messages about protesters in Ferguson, Missouri, who now are protesting that they didn't get paid for the work that they did. And I put that word work in quotes. Have you reviewed any of that? Are you knowledgeable about any of that information, Ms. Ramirez?
No, but I would say this, that at this juncture, the most helpful thing that we could do is to try to bring the community and the police together in dialogues at the local level.
I do understand that. That was in your testimony, and I think the panel understands it. But if you were presented with information that showed that indicated that there was a funder or funders who had hired protesters that may well have been bussed into places like Ferguson, Missouri, or sent to places like Baltimore, and we ended up watching buildings and businesses be burned and property damage being created and, in some cases, assault, would that be worthy of an investigation, would you think, by the local police force?
Yes.
And what about by the U.S. Attorney General?
I think that they should, that if there is evidence that someone were being paid to engage in violent protests and engage in violence, then that's a serious problem.
But you wouldn't think that if they didn't say violence, if they just said protest and it turned into violence, then that wouldn't be a crime?
That's a different situation.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn that and ask Sheriff Clark if he could respond with his reflections upon this exchange that you've heard.
Sure, I was a little disappointed that there weren't more aggressive prosecutions and attempts to investigate some of the behavior of some of the rioters who were captured on videotape. One of the ones that stands out to me was a group of young individuals standing and dancing on top of a police cruiser that had been destroyed, so to speak, as if they had captured some sort of ground. It's government property. In Wisconsin, we have a statute inciting a riot. I think those things should be used both sides, and it just seems to be too much focus on what the police may have done, prior to the riots breaking out. As you indicated, there's a more socially acceptable way under our First Amendment to display your frustrations, your anger, and it's not rioting. It's not destroying property of other people. They abandoned. We saw that night what Baltimore would look like without the police, with police stepping back as they did, some say retreating. So it was an ugly situation for a great American city.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank the Chairman and the witnesses, and yield back the balance of my time.